Hello and welcome to Reading for the Love of It Presents. My name is Erica Townsend and I am the Executive Administrator with the EYS Reading Association. I'm also the conference organizer of Reading for the Love of It. I'm very excited to introduce you today to Kenneth Oppel, and he will introduce you to his latest trilogy, Bloom, Hatch, and Thrive. You will hear about murderous plants, deadly hatchlings, mutant teens, and the nightmare that started it all. Before we get going, please note that you are joining us in listen-only mode. That means that we cannot hear or see you. However, you should have no difficulty in watching and listening to the presentation. Kenneth Oppel is the best-selling author of numerous books, including Airborne, which won the Governor General's Award for Children's Literature and a Michael L. Prince Honor Book Award, and the Silverwing Trilogy, which has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Some of his other books include The Boundless, Every Hidden Thing, and Inkling. The Nest and Half-Brother both won the Canadian Library Association's Book of the Year for Children Award. His latest novels are Bloom and its sequels, Hatch and Thrive. And now I am happy to introduce you to Kenneth Oppel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really happy to have this chance to talk to you about my latest 3 books, the Bloom Trilogy, which begins with Bloom, continues with Hatch, and culminates in Thrive, which just came out a couple weeks ago, completing the trilogy. One of the questions I get asked most often as a writer is, where do you get your ideas? And I sometimes wonder if people think ideas are hard to come by, like they're rare elements that need to be mined out of the earth or filtered through the air. I think ideas are one of the most common elements in our human periodic table. And I'm pretty sure that everyone I'm talking to right now has dozens, if not hundreds of ideas every day. You might not recognize them as ideas. They may present as weird questions or dumb thoughts that just sort of float through your mind like weather. But one of the things I get to do as a writer is whenever I get one of these weird questions or dumb thoughts, sometimes I write it down in this old-fashioned device, an ideas notebook. And once I write it down, this is how the whole process of brainstorming begins for me. I filled many of these books over the decades. I know it's a promising idea if it keeps pulling me back and I have more questions about it and I answer those questions. And they may trigger more questions still. I may do sketches, I doodle, I do graphs, I do bubble charts. This is me just brainstorming, imagining all the things that just might happen in my story. This is actually my favorite part of writing. I'm not tied down to anything yet. Everything is still a possibility, but it's just a very exciting time because an idea to me is sort of like, well, it's sort of like throwing a rock in the pond and you get that big kerplop and then the ripples radiate outwards from the center. And that to me is a very good description of how an idea grows by ripple or layer based on that one little impulse, which often, as I said, is just a question. What if question, often in my case. So in the case of Bloom, the idea came from 2 very different places. The first was a single sentence that popped into my head one day. It was simple. It went like this. There was a dead patch in the garden where nothing grew. I liked that sentence a lot because right away it triggered more questions. Why not? What's wrong with the soil? Is it too acid? Is it too alkaline? Is there something buried underneath? Is the soil cursed? Is there something buried under there waiting to come up? And that triggered another thought, which was, well, what if something did come up one day in this dead patch where nothing grew? Why would it be different? How is it that it could thrive when everything else failed before? So I wrote it dutifully down in my ideas notebook, and nothing happened. It just sat there on the page, and I couldn't figure out what kind of story it wanted to be until a couple years later, when my eldest daughter had a terrible nightmare. She has some very vivid nightmares. I too have vivid dreams. I try to write them down whenever possible because they're so strange and unreal sometimes. They're like stories told to me by another person, except I'm telling myself a story when I'm asleep. My daughter's nightmare was as follows. She was outside walking and it began to rain very heavily. She realizes that they're not raindrops, they're tiny little eggs, and they are hatching all around her, releasing terrible, creepy, crawly little creatures. Obviously, she is terrified. She runs for cover. She sees a bridge up ahead. She runs underneath it, only to find the biggest egg of all, which has hatched and released the biggest, creepiest, crawly creature of all, which is in the process of eating another human being. So it's not every day you get an image like that delivered to you. As a writer, I'm very greedy. I'm always on the lookout for striking ideas and images, and this nightmare gave me one in spades. I had to have it, and it gave me the idea for not just one story, but three. So what I did is I took my daughter's nightmare and I smushed it together with my sentence, "There was a dead patch in the garden where nothing grew." And imagine the story that began after a rainfall that didn't bring eggs, but brought seeds. And that was the beginning of Bloom. So I decided to start my story on an island on the west coast of Canada, in British Columbia, called Salt Spring Island. You can see it there where the red dot is. It's pretty much right in the middle between Victoria, where I did most of my growing up and schooling, and Vancouver. I'm very familiar with Salt Springs, a beautiful place, rolling hills and forest and fields, a big mountain in the middle called Mount Maxwell. There are inlets and beaches. There's a fun town called Ganges, with interesting shops, including some very good bookshops. It's built on a marina. It's got float planes, ferries, all the things I love about a maritime setting. So sometimes it's fun to start things in a setting that's a little bit removed, a little bit isolated, because you get to meet people in a more sort of concentrated and intense setting. So this is where you meet my three heroes, teenagers, Anaya, Petra, and Seth. They all go to the same school. And the story begins after a huge deluge, and these strange black plants begin growing all over the island. The first to appear is a very thick, spiky grass, and it grows incredibly quickly, 6 feet in 24 hours. It grows in lawns and fields. It crowds out farmers' crops, which is a big problem because no one knows how to get rid of this stuff. You can chop it down, but it grows back the next day. You can spray it with herbicide and it has no effect. You can burn it, but it releases toxic fumes that sear people's lungs. So the authorities tell people and farmers, do not try to burn the black grass. When it grows to its full height, it produces this beautiful bloom. And that bloom literally coughs pollen into the air. And everyone on the island is incredibly allergic to this pollen, except my three heroes, Anaya, Petra, and Seth. And this is unusual, especially in Anaya's case, because Anaya has a multitude of allergies. She has food allergies, she has seasonal allergies, she has all sorts of environmental sensitivities, she has asthma as a result of her allergies, and yet she is not allergic to this pollen. In fact, once it starts to fly, she feels a little better than usual, a little clearer. She can really fill her lungs. She's never felt this healthy. Her former best friend Petra also has an allergy, just one, but it's a doozy. It's an allergy to water, which is a real and very rare allergy, but a very debilitating one. Imagine if you couldn't wash or shower or bathe or swim or get caught in the rain. And yet after this first rain, Petra starts to discover that she's not as allergic to water anymore. Seth, the other hero, is also not allergic to this pollen. And he has some other odd things going on with him, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So the black spiky grass is only the first of the new arrivals on the island. And by the way, not only are the plants appearing on Salt Spring Island. They're spreading all over the world in a matter of days. The next weird plant to appear is a vine, again, very quickly growing. It has little carnivorous pods on it that can eat small birds and squirrels and other little mammals. And it has a tendency to grow into people's homes, and it releases a kind of a sleeping gas, which kind of knocks you out and enables this quick growing vine perhaps to grow up your nostrils, down your throat, and strangle you. Again, my three heroes aren't bothered by the sleeping gas. They do not get knocked out. The worst plant of all is what I call a pit plant in the book. It is this huge pod that just grows under the earth very patiently and waits for prey to walk overhead, maybe a raccoon, maybe a deer, maybe a human. It falls through into this big pod, which seals up and releases a acidic digestive enzyme, which melts and digests the prey. Our three heroes get caught in some of these pit plants early on in the story, and they emerge unharmed, while everyone else is badly, badly injured or even killed by these plants if they fall into them. So by this point, scientists are beginning to take note of our three heroes and wonder what's special about these kids. And moreover, is there something we can learn from them, perhaps in their DNA, that will allow us to make a medicine, a vaccine that we can use to treat people around the world while we're trying to figure out A, where these plants came from, B, how to get rid of them. So Anaya, Petra, and Seth are spirited off the island to Vancouver, to a military base on Dead Man's Island, a real place, as it turns out, just off Stanley Park, and they're undergoing tests. Meanwhile, they're trying to battle these plants, figure out where they came from, and they're also making some alarming discoveries about themselves. Bloom gave me the opportunity to do one of the things I like best as a writer, which is to create new creatures, new monsters. If you're familiar with some of my other books, you'll know that I've written a series where the main characters are bats. I've also written the Airborne series, in which my stalwart heroes discover new life forms in the sky that have previously been undiscovered, things called cloud cats or aerozoans, which are like flying squids. I've written about all sorts of monstrous creatures in my Victor Frankenstein books, in The Nest. I had a Sasquatch on a train in The Boundless. So in Bloom, I got the chance to create some monstrous plants. I was a little worried I couldn't make them scary enough, but luckily I had a friend who's a botanist, and he told me a lot of interesting things about plants and even drew some potential cryptogenic plants, which is the name I give them in my book. Cryptogenic literally just means of unknown origin. So as is usually the case, the things that we have around us on Earth, the things that happen on our own planet, are sometimes weirder and more wonderful than the things I could dream up. I like to think I have a good imagination, but there's really no beating what we have all around us all the time. So I looked at a lot of earth plants, and I'll show you some of my inspirations for my cryptogenic plants in the Bloom trilogy. I needed a fast growing plant for my black spiky grass. So I looked at bamboo. Bamboo does grow very quickly, 3 feet in 24 hours. I wanted even faster, so I made mine faster. It's like woody like bamboo, but it is very spiky, and it produces this big bloom. Another grass I found interesting is Phragmites. It's a variety of invasive grass that's a problem in southern Ontario. Apparently, it's very hard to control. I like the idea of something that seems kind of innocuous and even harmless becoming a huge problem. Because imagine if this stuff started growing in farmers' fields. What if it crowded out all our vegetables and fruit and grains and cereals and rice? I mean, we might have global food shortages. So that was one of the things that's happening in the Bloom series. I have carnivorous plants in my book, and we have carnivorous plants on Earth. Here's the Venus flytrap. You've probably all seen pictures of this. I was even more influenced by pitcher plants. These guys are interesting. You can see in the middle here, they're essentially funnels. They have a slippery rim, and apparently they release quite a pleasant fragrance to attract prey, which might perch on the rim and then fall inside. Once they fall inside, it's difficult for them to climb out because it's steep, it's slippery, and there's liquid at the bottom. So they might drown, or they might just starve to death, and then the plant will absorb them. So these truly are carnivorous plants. Some of them are quite large. My pit plants in Bloom are very large indeed and can easily accommodate one or even two humans. They're very generous in their accommodation. There are toxic plants in my book, and indeed we have toxic plants on Earth. This is hogweed. It doesn't look so scary because it's got a nice white flower. The leaves are a little spiky and hairy perhaps, but it's the sap that you need to worry about. If you get it on your skin, you break out in terrible welts and hives, terrible allergic reaction to this sap. If you get it in your eyes, it can actually blind you. So it's very dangerous stuff. And in various parts of the world, it has to be kept very carefully under control. I have cryptogenic water lilies in bloom. And we indeed have many beautiful water lilies on Earth, as you know. They produce usually a lovely flower. I liked the idea of having a flower that produced seeds that the plant could spit at its prey. And these seeds perhaps are covered in acid, so the seeds can burn their way into the prey, germinate, and grow new plants. So the idea of a seed spitting plant actually came from this guy, the Sandbox Tree. It's very spiky. But the interesting thing, I think, about the Sandbox Tree is its fruit. It produces this pumpkin-sized or shaped fruit. And inside, of course, are the seeds. And when the fruit is ripe, it explodes like a hand grenade and sends the seeds spraying out like shrapnel at a very high velocity over quite a long range. So you do not want to be standing anywhere around the Sandbox Tree when the fruit is ripe. So I just melded the Sandbox Tree with a water lily to create a sort of a machine gun water lily in my Bloom book. So it was a lot of fun dreaming these plants up. I think by the end, I was quite pleased with the plants. They seemed pretty threatening to me. And then, of course, I came to Bloom, or Hatch, rather. And Hatch, of course, really kicks off with my daughter's nightmare, a rain not of seeds, but of eggs. So when you've got eggs, you've got things hatching out of them. Again, I took my inspiration from good old planet Earth. And if you magnify things, they really are quite scary. Hookworms take on sort of a new presence in your imagination when you blow them up. I mean, imagine these things sort of, I don't know, 10 feet high. They've got fangs, horns, jaws. Mosquitoes blown up also become pretty ominous. Water beetles are interesting. I imagined these ones sort of like, if I could enlarge them, like alligators on stilts, sort of 10 feet off the ground. And that was pretty scary. They also eat in an interesting way. They plunge their nose inside their prey and inject a chemical that liquefies their prey, and then they drink it. I thought that was pretty much the most horrible way I could imagine of being eaten. So naturally I use that. In Hatch, this little guy sprays boiling acid from a little valve on his stomach. So how could I resist having a cryptogenic hatchling that sprayed acid? And there are all sorts of other inspirations that I used from planet Earth for my hatchlings in Hatch. One of the things that's happening in Hatch is the eggs are not just hatching, they sort of tend to fuse together and mix and match their DNA to create new creatures, which are becoming progressively more mammalian. So we're moving away from birds and insects into full-blown alien animal life. The third book, Thrive, that culminates is I imagined that the trilogy would be structured very neatly so that in the first book you saw plants sent down, then you'd see animals sent down, and in the third book you'd get to meet who's responsible for sending all these terrible plagues down on the planet. So let's take just a little peek with some dramatic music of what happens in the third and final book. There are a lot of monsters in this trilogy, but one of the most interesting aspects of the books for me was what's happening with our three heroes, Anaya, Petra, and Seth. Yes, they're battling murderous plants and animals, but they're also changing themselves in some very alarming ways. Petra, for instance, starting in Bloom, starts to grow a tail, and she's not happy about it. It may be like a scorpion tail or an alligator tail. She's not sure. It may have a barb at the end that has venom in it. She wants it removed, but she's also changing in a way that allows her to swim again. So she gets swimming back. The earth water is changing over the course of the trilogy. She can plunge in and hold her breath for a long time and move very easily underwater. So there are some things Petra likes about the changes happening to her. Seth is growing feathers on his arms. He's not sure if they will form functional wings, but he's really hoping they do because he's been dreaming of flying since he was a kid. Anaya is growing claws. Her toenails and fingernails get very long and pointy and black, and she starts growing hair all over her body. She's not happy about this. She thinks she's turning into a Wookiee, but she also feels stronger than she ever has before. And she likes that. She can run really quickly and jump. So, of course, in my head, I had ideas about the kind of creatures that my kids might be heading towards. I don't really want to talk about it too much or give anything away because it's one of the mysteries of the book. But one of the questions my kids get to ask is there any going back? Is there ever any opportunity or hope that we could become normal again? And do we even want to become normal again? All the kids have very different reactions. So this gives you some idea of what's going on in my latest books, the Bloom Trilogy. I hope you've enjoyed the slideshow, this little sneak peek. I hope you all stay very well. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. That was a fun and fascinating presentation. It was intriguing to learn about your writing process. I'd also like to thank Harper Collins Canada Limited for donating a set of these books for me to give away. I'll be drawing a name from the list of the participants and then reaching out to the lucky winner in the coming days. If you want to visit with Kenneth Oppel, you can visit him online at kennethoppel.ca or follow his Twitter account at Kenneth Oppel. And that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining us. And please remember to continue reading for the love of it. Bye for now.